Hey guys, and welcome back to my CCNA 200-301 course. Patrice is here, and in this video we are going to review REST APIs. Today's video is going to be a bit long, so grab a choice of your beverage and let's get started. As I mentioned before, API stands for Application Programming Interface, and that is something applications use to talk to each other. There is multiple types of APIs, and one of the most famous ones is called REST API. REST stands for Representational State Transfer. And API that follows the REST principles is called RESTful or REST-based APIs. And these principles are uniform interface, client server, stateless, cacheable, layered system, and code on demand. And if you want to learn more about these 6 principles, you can refer to that URL you can see in the slide. Amongst all of these 6 principles, we will be digging into 3 of them, which are the main ones. One of them is the client server, which is the most important ones in my view. And the other 2 is stateless and cacheable. Let's start with client server. The name is self-explanatory. We need a server that provides APIs, and we call it REST server. So your developers should write some sort of codes that allow that server to respond to the requests. And on the other hand, we have the REST client, which can be an end user that opens a web browser and calls something from the REST server. As I mentioned, web browser. So basically APIs or REST APIs using HTTP or HTTPS for the conversations between the client and the server. And the first step is called API call. So client calls something from the server. And that is a HTTP packet. And 2 main information in that API call is the verb, which is mainly what you're going to do. And I'll show you what are the options in the next slide. And the URI or Uniform Resource Indicator. I'll show you what is the structure of the URI in the next slide as well. And once the server receives that API call, it responds with a code that we will be talking about it. And also if there is any data in response to that API call, it will respond the data as well. For example, you ask for a switch information from a Cisco DNA center, and that DNA center server will send you the information of that switch. There are 4 REST actions: create, read, update, and delete. And if we get the first character of each action, it will be summarized as CRUD. So you'll hear it in many documentations: CRUD. Create, read, update, and delete. And the equivalent verbs in the HTTP header, if you want to do any of these tasks or actions with API calls or through HTTP packets, the equivalent verbs for create is post, for read is get, for update is either patch and put, depends on the situation, and for delete is delete. These names are self-explanatory. Create means if you want to create something, create a new object, create a new entry on your REST server, the action is create, and the equivalent HTTP method is post. I'll show you all of these in actions. If you want to read something from the server, you use get method. If you want to update something on the server, you use patch or put methods. And if you want to delete something, you use delete method on the server. The other parameter you need to put in your API call is URI, as we saw in the previous slides. And URI stands for Uniform Resource Identifier. And this is the syntax of the URI: scheme, authority, path, and query. Scheme is basically your protocol. Are you going to use HTTP or HTTPS? Authority is your domain, is your FQDA mainly, like catalystcenter.cisco.com or whatever the IP address or the host name of your REST server you want to refer to. And the path is actually the resource, the specific resource on that REST server you want to access. For example, /DNA /intent /API /version1 /network-device. This is the path you need to put in your URI to reach out to network devices on the DNA center. And the query is the parameters that you want to ask, basically. Like parameter 1 equal 192.168.1.1. So if you mention, for example, https:// catalystcenter.cisco.com / that one, and then question mark parameter 192.168.1.1, what will be returning to you is the specification or whatever that DNA center has for that device 192.168.1.1, and you will receive it in return. As we saw in the previous slides, beside the data you receive from the server or REST server, you receive a HTTP response code as well. These codes are categorized in 5 different categories, and each of these categories start with a number: 100, 200, 300, 400, or 500, something. 100 ones are called informational. 200 ones, which normally the ones that we want to see, are the success ones. And the major one and the main one is 200. So when you send an API to a server, the server will respond with 200. That means your request was okay, everything was okay, you had the permissions to access that specific resource, etc., etc. And the server responds with the 200 and the data you ask for. 300 are redirections. For example, when you call an API on a server and that server needs to send you to another server, the response you receive from the initial server is 300 and it tells you where to go. 400 is the client error. So if in response to your API call, you receive something that starts with 4, like 401, which is unauthorized access, that means something is not right on the client side. And unauthorized means your credentials, for example, wasn't correct. And 500, on the other hand, whatever starts with 5, it actually means that something is not right on the server. Server is not ready, server is not responding, etc., etc. These codes are very, very useful when it comes to troubleshooting. And if you know these categories, you can figure out where you should look for the issue. The next principle of RESTful APIs is stateless. First of all, let's see what does state mean. The state simply means that the previous requested data from your REST server. And when it comes to stateful or stateless with the API calls, it simply means that who needs to keep this historical data. And in the stateless communications of RESTful APIs, this is the client that should keep the history, and your servers or the REST servers will not keep the requested data history. The last principle we discuss here is cacheable. If an API wants to be RESTful, each API response should clear that or label the content if that content is cacheable or not. So the client knows that if that content can be cached or cannot be cached. And basically caching is always used to improve the performance by avoiding re-downloading the contents that re-downloading them is unnecessary. And each cacheable item should have a timer or should clear its time frame so client knows where it should clear that cached version and request a new version from the REST server. Security is always a concern. And when it comes to API calls, we need to make sure that the requester is a valid requester and the person who asks this information is an authorized person. There is multiple authentication methods that RESTful APIs support. To name a few, the first one is using API keys. API keys are just like a very long string that can be used for authenticating the between the client and the server. The other one is JWT, or JSON Web Token, which is a token like an API key to authenticate the clients. The other one is SSL certificates or TLS certificates. So using certificates to make sure that the requester is a valid certificate, the valid requester. Or basic authentication. Basic authentication simply means that using username and password to make sure that you are an authorized requester. And Java Session ID or cookies as another authentication method. Okay, let's get our hands a bit dirty. One of the most resourceful locations you can go for Cisco programming features and information is Cisco DevNet website. So you can simply type developer.cisco.com and enter to this website, and you can log in with your Google account or your GitHub account if you have, or using your Cisco ID or WebEx ID if you have. So once you log into the system, you can access all of these resources that mainly categorize in 4 different things. Documentation, if you're looking for API or SDK or any programming documentation, you can go to documentation, or you can see some labs here. The sample code is called Cisco Code Exchange, as you can see here, that you can see a lot of samples that have been written by Cisco and all of the community developers. And my favorite location is the sandbox. Sandbox is kind of emulated environments that you can go there and you can actually run a lab and test all of these things in the Cisco lab environment for free. The only thing is some of the labs are actually always on, so you just need to launch them, but some of them needs to be reserved in advance. Before we go to the next thing, I want to show you the basic tool that you can use for API troubleshooting or learn something about the API is your web developer tool in your browser. And it normally comes up with Control-Shift-I in most of the browsers, at least I've tested. I just want to show you here, you can see that this is the status code we talked about, 200. So my computer requested this, and then the response from the web server or from the domain, as you can see, was 200, which means that I was able to access that specific resource I requested. So if you go anywhere on this website, for example, if you click on documentation, you can see where your computer tried to access and what was the results here. So this is the most basic tool that you can use in your browser to figure out what sort of HTTP requests or responses you have when you're dealing with different websites. It's very useful. The other fabulous application I want to show you is called Postman. Postman is one of the best applications that you can use for the API interactions. And it has paid versions and free versions. So if you want to use the free versions, it's fine. I'm using the free version as well. But if you want to use the paid versions, there are options for paid versions as well to get more features from this application. So as you can see, it has versions for Windows, for Apple, and for Linux. So it depends on the operating system you're using. You can download the right version, and you just need to log in. You can use it even without a login, but it won't keep the history of your requests. So it's better to have a account so you can have some history and keep some stuff in your workspace. Okay, this is what you see when you log into the Postman for the first time. So the first thing I want to do is create a collection. Collection is basically a container, a folder that you can keep your different requests under that folder. So I create a collection here, and for example, I rename it to CCNA 200 3, or 1. And then once you create your collection, you can create requests. So I click add request here, or you can simply click add request here. And when you click the add request, you can see that it starts a new get request here. What I want to show you is a simple using of sandbox within this environment. So what I'm going to do is using one of the always on sandboxes that is for Cisco DNA Center, and I use its URL, which is sandbox-dnac2.com/dna/system/API vi1 auth and token. This is to actually get the token for the for the next request that we want to put in place. So as you can see here, you can mention what is the HTTP method you want to use here. And you can see those options we talked about: get, post, put, patch, or delete. This is a get request. And if you go to authorization, you can see that you can select the authentication type. And for this one, what Cisco provides for the sandbox is basic authentication. And the default username is DevNet user, and the password is Cisco123 ! With capital C in the beginning. So when I click send here, you can see that I will send this request to Cisco Sandbox, and Cisco Sandbox will come back to me. Sorry, the method has to be post for this one. So I post here. And then you can see the status code, which is 200, and a token, an API key came back to me. A token, not API key. A token came back to me with this authentication we put in place. So now I want to use the FQDN, the request I talked about here, and get the device information from that sandbox thing. So the query I'm going to put in place for this one is a get query, and then sandbox-dnac2.cisco.com/dna/intent/API/version1 and network-device. And again, when I go to this time, it is get. If I go to authorization, I go to basic authentication. And then another thing I need to do, I have to go to headers. And in the key, I have to use x-auth-token. And then paste the token. I got it from here. So I copy this token here and take it to the next request and use it as the header here. And if I click on send, you can see that the Cisco Sandbox will respond to me with a JSON output that we will be talking about it in the next video. So this is the response from the Cisco Sandbox. So you can see that the information about the network devices that have been registered in that specific DNA center. So this is the full list of devices that are registered there. And here you can change the format of your output as well. If you want to see it in XML, you can change it to XML format to view the output as an XML. But JSON is our preferred version because it's more human readable, and also when you go to the programming stuff, you can see that dealing with JSON is much more easier than XML. And yeah, that's it. I would highly encourage you to go to developer.cisco.com and use the sandboxes and check the documentation about the APIs and how we can call different APIs for your preferred Cisco platform, and how we can use the things, how we can fetch the information, how we can change the information on the sandbox. That's the good thing. You don't need to test these things in your production network. So sandboxes will give you a very, very big opportunity. All right, guys, this was our today's video. In today's video, we covered exam topic 6.5, describe the characteristics of REST-based APIs, authentication types, CRUD, HTTP verbs, and data encoding. I'll be talking about the data encoding in the next video that I'll be talking about the JSON. I wish you enjoyed today's video and see you in the next ones.